Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, if the first round of Brexit talks in Brussels has been tough and gruelling, it hasn't dampened the spirits of the International Trade Secretary, Liam Fox. He's in the United States for talks about a possible free trade deal, which could be discussed, but certainly not signed until after Brexit. America is already the UK's second largest trading partner, although we currently export much more than we import. So when I spoke to Dr. Fox from Washington earlier on, I asked him whether we might see more American goods and services coming into Britain.
Yes, well, we actually have a trade surplus with the United States in goods and services. As you say, our trade's worth about £167 billion. We've done some internal work that reckons that it could be worth over another £40 billion in that by 2030 if we're able to remove the barriers to trade that we have. But that will be a difficult discussion. All FTA discussions are. To one extent or another, but we've got great support from the United States and the administration as well as Congress to help push the agenda forward.
And the kind of thing that we could get out of this in terms of people watching the programme, consumers, is cheaper food in our supermarkets.
Well, potentially. Of course, agriculture is always a very difficult issue. Pretty much in any free trade agreement that's ever been done, the last chapter to get agreed, as we're finding with Japan at the present time, and the EU, is agriculture. But we'll want to look at a whole range of other things on financial services, for example, and other parts of the service economy.
Right. Let me turn to the big area of discussion in Britain recently, which has been transition arrangements with the EU as we prepared to leave the EU. You were talking yourself of these being weeks or months, and then suddenly you have fallen into line with the rest of the cabinet and said, no, a 2-year transition period, as the Chancellor wants, would be completely acceptable. Is that the furthest ambition? I mean, is it 2 years and not a day more, or could it be 3 years? Could it be 4 years? What's your thinking?
Well, first of all, I'm actually more clear in my own mind that leaving the European Union is the right decision for the UK. I think I'm more certain about that than even I was at the time of the referendum. And I think that because our economy has been very robust, our foreign direct investments at a record level, we've seen our economy continue to grow with record employment and falling unemployment, rising confidence amongst our manufacturers. So it seems to me that we should go into this with a great deal of confidence. And I want to leave the European Union in March, at the end of March 2019. Now, once we have done that, once we've fulfilled our promise to the British people, we can look to see what we are going to do in terms of making that a smooth transition for our businesses, to give them maximal certainty and to cause minimal disruption. And frankly, having waited for over 40 years to leave the European Union, 24 months would be a rounding error. Whether that's 23, whether that's 25, it's not a huge deal, and nor is it an ideological one. Now, well, nor is it an ideological one. It's about the practical issues we would face, about getting, for example, any new immigration system into place, getting any new customs system into place. That's a practical issue. And I think we would want to get it out of the way before the election. I don't think people would want to have it dragging on, but I think that it's perfectly reasonable to have a transition that makes it as smooth as possible. I think that's what businesses would want us to have in Britain, and I think that's actually what our investors abroad would also want to see.
So any transition period, in your view, must end by the time of the next British general election?
I think we'd have to be very clear that it was time limited, and it was limited in its scope. We knew exactly what it was going to mean. For example, would we be able to negotiate our own trade agreements during that transition period? Because if we were not, then we wouldn't be able to take full advantage of the freedoms available to us when we leave the European Union. So there's a lot of discussion to be had, but I don't think that there's any great ideological blockage on the concept of a transition or an implementation period, as I would rather put it.
So it could be 3 more years, in your view, up to the next election. The reason I'm pushing this point is that during that period we could still be paying into the EU, we could still be under the ECJ, we could still be accepting, to all intents and purposes, being inside the single market rather than alongside it. And to a lot of people that would not feel like Brexit, and you know very well that there are people around who want to use the transition period as a way of trying to subvert or avoid the Brexit decision itself.
Well, that is why I think it's imperative that we leave the European Union first, and then any implementation period is done voluntarily alongside the European Union to minimise any disruption.
Looking at the last couple of weeks, particularly the last week, at Michel Barnier's body language and what he's said about our negotiating position, it seems to me that the politics are beginning to get in the way, as it were. Are you worried about the tone that's coming out of the EU? It does not sound friendly at all.
I don't think anybody has ever thought that the separation issues between Britain and the European Union would be easy. They are very complex, and clearly there's a lot of passion that is stimulated by that. The second part of the negotiation, which will begin when enough progress has been made on the first part, will be about our future trading relationship. And I get an increasing number of not only British but European businesses who say, you know, we need to keep an open and comprehensive trading agreement when we get to that part of the negotiation. Otherwise, Europe will become less competitive in a global context. And sometimes I think the debate is being conducted as though Europe is operating in an economic vacuum.
One of the things that EU negotiators say again and again and again, particularly in private, is that they are not sure who's actually in charge of the British government until we have settled the question who is going to be Prime Minister throughout the period and into the next election. They find it very difficult to know how to negotiate. Is it not time for the Conservatives to think again about who your leader is going to be as we go through this process?
It's not the impression I get from talking to other European partners. We made very clear our position. The Prime Minister set it out in her Lancaster House speech. That has not changed. We've been making that clear in all the meetings, both in Europe and beyond, that the government's position is the same, that we believe we'll be able to get our legislation through Parliament. We've got a working majority now in the House of Commons. And, you know, when most of our European partners are discussing with us, they're very used to having minority governments themselves.
Would you like to see Theresa May remain as Prime Minister until the next election?
I would, yes.
Liam Fox, thanks very much for talking to us.
Thank you.
The Labour Party is heading into the summer break in high spirits, ahead in the polls and managing to keep something of a lid on their division, for now at least. Jeremy Corbyn is plotting a tour of marginal constituencies to keep up the pressure. But the looming spectre of Brexit is threatening to spoil the honeymoon. Joining us in the studio now, the Shadow International Trade Secretary, Barry Gardiner. Mr Gardiner, many thanks for being with us. No doubt, like the rest of Westminster, mentally you'll have already checked out, you're already dreaming of Mai Tais on the beach. But let's start with Brexit, shall we? Jeremy Corbyn said this recently. What we're in favour of is a tariff-free trade relationship with Europe in the future. That's as far as we've got. That's as far as you've got.
Look, I think it's clear that what we do need to do is to ensure that British businesses continue to be able to export their goods and their services in a friction-free way into Europe. And that's one of the things that the government has told us, that they can secure the exact same benefits. Now, that is what David Davis said. It's proving very difficult for him to negotiate. But what we are doing is keeping the government to account for all the promises that have been made and to make sure that we try and get the very best deal for our business. That's absolutely critical. But it's also critical that we look at the labour and skills issues that they have. They need to be able to access the best skills from wherever they are around the world. And that also means, yes, adjusting the free movement of people, but making sure that the labour and skills that they need are still able to be accessed.
I mean, the Labour position, if I can sum it up as this, is you want to remain within the currency union, you want the single market, you want, as you've just mentioned, some form of restriction on free movement. The Rebecca Long-Bailey, have your cake and eat it strategy. I mean, how is that possible?
Look, no, not at all. You talked about remaining within the currency union. We're not in the currency union. We're not part of
the benefits of.
Well, no, we don't. We've been very clear that we want to leave the European Union. That means we will no longer have membership of the European Union, and with that membership goes many of the aspects that you've just talked about. So,
but what is the mechanism by which one can retain the benefits of the single market, but without putting restrictions on immigration?
Well, look, there are a number, and what we've been very careful to do is to talk about the outcomes that we need and not to talk about the structures. There are those people in the UK who would like to see us leave the membership of the European Union but retain membership of the EEA, the European Economic Area. Now, I don't subscribe to that because I think most of the political reasons that people wanted to leave the European Union would actually not be achieved by doing that. Some people have suggested that we might remain part of the customs union, where the common tariffs for our goods and services external to the union, but a free market within for our goods. Sorry, I said goods and services, only for goods in the customs union.
I understand the focus on outcomes, but the process matters in all of this as well. I mean, at the moment, if you were to put together a list of all the people who believe that you can retain, membership of the single market and have restrictions on immigration, the list would comprise you and other members, not all, but other members of the Labour Party. If you're to comprise a list of everyone else, of everyone who believes you can't remain within the single market and have restrictions on immigration, that's everyone else who's expressed an opinion on the matter.
Can we just talk for a moment not about remaining in the single market? Let's talk clearly. Let's talk about membership of the single market. We will not be members of the single market. That means that we need to negotiate a free trade agreement with Europe that will set out the basis upon which we do trade. That means that we will then have the opportunity to negotiate the sort of customs arrangements that we would need to have. I hope that they will be as friction-free as possible, both for our goods and also to ensure that our services can trade into Europe as well.
I mean, how likely, though, is it that you can retain all the benefits of the single market at the same time as having controls on immigration? I mean, you yourself have conceded the remaining 27 members of the European Union have a political objective here, as well as economic objectives. Their objective is to ensure that those who remain within the European Union think that they've got a better deal than people who are on the outside of it. In essence, you are saying that any deal that we have at the end of this process would be worse than the situation that we are currently in.
Neil, look, you're absolutely right that they too have political objectives, and I think this is sometimes what the government forgets. The government seems to think that actually we have these political objectives of retaining or gaining back our sovereignty, of keeping control of our borders, of not paying money into the European budget, and these are our political objectives, and we're prepared to change the terms of our trading relationship and risk changing those adversely because we want those political objectives. But we then turn round, or the government then turns round and looks at Europe and says, oh, but it's economically in your interest to give us a good trading relationship in the future. Now, they forget that actually the European Union has precisely those political objectives that you've just spoken of. They want to make it clear to those members of the 27 that actually they should not wish to leave like the UK is doing, because if they do, they will be worse off outside the 27th than within it. They want to maintain the European project. They want to make sure that ever closer union is still a feature for them. Now, that's their political objective, but we shouldn't be naive about that. But what that means is there is a very tough negotiating deal to be done to ensure that we do get those exact same benefits that David Davis promised.
So Liam Fox is wrong when he says that a UK-EU trade deal should be one of the easiest in history.
Liam Fox caveated what he said because he went on in the next sentence to say, unless politics gets in the way.
And who'd have thought politics could get in the way?
And of course, the whole thing is about politics. So of course politics gets in the way. And that's why we have to be clear on the outcomes and not get fixated upon the structures. And that's what consistently in the Labour Party we've made sure we do.
I wonder if we can focus just for a second on exactly where the Labour Party is. We are never terribly far away from the whiff of internecine warfare in the Labour Party over the past couple of years. And today we're hearing that Tom Watson is once again being targeted. I mean, do you think that he should remain as Deputy Leader? Do you think that there should be another Deputy Leader?
There is no vacancy at Deputy Leader at the moment.
That's not quite the answer to my question.
Look, can I just be clear? Tom is a good colleague of mine, as all the shadow cabinet are. We need to focus on our unity of purpose. That's why we're going out in the country over the next 6 weeks, we are going to be taking our case to the country again. We're going to have a campaigning summer, and Tom is going to be part of that, as are all other members of the Shadow Cabinet.
Unity at a time that people are openly talking about deselection when we had a general election 5 minutes ago.
No, look, the last thing that we want is for us to be trying to replicate the disagreement and the fighting that's going on in the Conservative Party at the moment.
So do you have a message for those talking openly about deselection, reselection?
On the deselection issue, look, every MP, for the past 20 years, I have been able to be deselected. It's called a trigger ballot. It happens in every constituency that they have a trigger ballot for sitting MPs who want to remain, and if we pass that trigger ballot, that means 50% of the organisations say, yeah, we still want that person to stay, we stay. There's always been that. What I don't want is for us to get fixated on these issues. I want us to be out there attacking the people who are doing down the people of this country, the people in government who are not providing the leadership that we need. That's what we must do as a Labour Party. Unity, absolutely going forward, out there campaigning, letting people know how we want to change their lives at a time when this government, who should be focused on getting a good deal on Brexit, who should be focused on the problems of austerity, are actually fighting about who's going to be the next Prime Minister.
We'll all keep an eye out for that unity over the coming summer months. Barry Gardiner, many thanks.
Can I just say, I wish Sophie well with the baby, and I thought you were going to give us some news this morning about what happened. News
on Sky? Who'd have thought it? Maybe another time.
Anyway,
we're going to look at
to her.
Barry, many thanks.
Cheers.